All right, thank you, Mike. And I'm really excited to be here. The conversation around data is one that I think we've been having since I began my career in IT a long time ago. But what's different these days, I think, is the intention and the focus around making data a strategic asset. We've been having this kind of conversation for several years now. Really began in the last administration, and it would seem, based on everything that we've heard so far from the Biden administration, that data and data strategy is going to remain a critical piece of the way we move forward as a government. So it's great with great respect and honor that we get to talk with Ted Kauk in his role as the chair of the Federal Chief Data Officer Council. Now, the CDO Council is a relatively new group. It was created in just a couple years ago as part of the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, and I think, as Ted was sharing, it preceded the pandemic by 2 meetings, and it just barely gotten under the wire before everything changed. But that hasn't stopped them. The Chief Data Officer Council has been doing great work over the past 15 months, and I'm going to ask Ted to begin by giving us a little background on the council, who's on it, the kinds of things that you're working on, and we can proceed from there into some other questions around the federal data strategy and what might come next from a data perspective. So, Ted, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. It's great to be here. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm the Chief Data Officer at the Department of Agriculture. And I'm really excited just to share a few things about the CDO Council first this morning. So just by way of introduction, the council was established under the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018, and that set out a number of requirements. Among them, that individual agencies across government needed to establish chief data officers. It also formally established the Chief Data Officer Council. As a result, the council itself now includes approximately 80 member CDOs from both CFO and non-CFO Act agencies across government. So it's been an incredible experience working with those individuals throughout the pandemic and through the council as we're collectively responsible for implementing the federal data strategy's individual agency actions at our agencies, for creating data-driven organizations in partnership with those other Evidence Act officials, including the evaluation and statistical officials. So we have this vision to lead transformational change that improves the nation's ability to leverage data as a strategic asset. And we've really put at the forefront of that work, creating a vibrant learning community that ensures we have the resources and best practices to lead data-driven change, because we know we're not starting from scratch, that there's been incredible work going on at agencies in various domains that we can leverage, and you'll get to hear about some of those efforts today. We also believe it's critical at this early stage that we understand more about what federal CDOs are doing. So the council recently conducted a survey of our members to understand the organizational reporting and grade for the CDOs, areas of responsibilities for CDOs at agencies today, and their common challenges. And so happy to say that we've released that as of this morning on the cdo.gov website, so you can check that out for more information. But looking forward to some other questions about the council's activities.
So Ted, one thing that strikes me is that there's 80 members. That's a big group and very inclusive, and I think it's a positive thing and different than how the Federal CIO Council works. That's the CFO Act agencies. There's 24 members. So with that many different agencies represented, and perhaps sub agencies within departments and other, how are you prioritizing the work? Now, I suspect that there's a lot of different priorities and different agendas based on different mission spaces, but are you looking for common threads? Are you focused on particular mission use cases or concepts? How do you choose what you're going to focus on?
Sure. Well, I do think that there are common needs, and there is a need for us to work across government when we're talking about leveraging data as strategic assets. So I think we're very fortunate that we have participation from all agencies on the council. In terms of the structure of the council, we do have a small agency representative on our executive committee, as well as a CFO Act representative. And they meet regularly to talk about specific needs. We don't make arbitrary distinctions, but we do think that there is an opportunity for us to make sure that the needs of our members are represented in that regard. And in our survey, you'll see that we've surveyed our members based on CFO and non-CFO Act representation, so we just understand the different needs a little bit better. So hopefully that gives a little bit of background on how we're dealing with that. But what I've found to be very powerful, and what I think other CDOs will share, is that there's just really fantastic work going on at our agencies. We want to leverage all of those best practices to move this forward and accelerate the work.
Well, I think it sounds like a great plan. We have a set of actions and activities that have been prescribed in the federal data strategy, in the 2020 action plan, which I think was termed the year 1 action plan. I haven't heard about a year 2 action plan yet, so I'm sure a lot of people are curious how we're doing on the year 1 plan. What comes after that?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that I would share is within the new administration, right? There's an intense focus on really those 4 overlapping issues on the COVID-19 pandemic, economic recovery, climate change, and a special focus on equity. And if you have had a chance to review a lot of the executive orders that have come out, many of them signal a holistic reexamination of how the government, our practices for collecting, using, sharing, and disseminating data. So on the council as a whole, we're working to support those priorities. We want to gather input from the public on the uses and priorities around improved data collection and dissemination practices that focus on those priorities, and equity in particular. Again, I mentioned we are developing best practices to improve. We want to build capacity. But in terms of the federal data strategy, there's just been an incredible amount of progress that's been made. Agencies have been identifying data needed to answer agency questions, standing up data governance boards, assessing their data and related infrastructure maturity, and then looking to increase their staff data skills. And the council has working groups on each of those areas. So first and foremost, we started in the middle of the pandemic. So one of our, we didn't know when we started in that January, February timeframe that we were going to be called upon to support increased data access with regard to pandemic data. But we did work as a council, and one of our first activities to collaborate with HHS, understand what agency data needs were for operational continuity of operations and workforce safety. But we've also established working groups around data sharing, data inventorying, and data skills. So you'll also see on cdo.gov that we've released 10 use cases, going back to that idea of leveraging what is going on at those individual agencies. And a couple of examples in that, especially you'll hear from, I think, Eileen Vadrine at Air Force, and one of the examples in that number of use cases is on their data governance certification pilot. There's also analytics and data science training programs that are happening at agencies. So we're gathering all those best practices and we're leveraging them for how we're going to move forward as a community together.
Well, what I love about what you're doing is you're creating this superset of government data sets that can be used by agencies to really drive digital transformation and drive connections between programs, drive connections between citizens and people that use government. We often operate in our agency stovepipe or our sub-agency stovepipe at times, so we don't share enough data, or we don't call, we don't refer to the same data element in the same way. And the governance piece and the publishing of data, or at least internally, seems to be tremendous steps towards that. With all that happening, though, how do you establish the appropriate guardrails for how either data sharing occurs or how people interact across government with these data sets? Data ethics is it's a function, it's a key element of the federal data strategy, and we have to be on the lookout for privacy concerns and others. And I think that you guys would be taking the leadership role there.
I think that speaks to, I think, our broader community. We have ex officio members with the other councils in government that with whom we need to collaborate. The Evaluation Officer Council, the Statistical Committee, the Privacy Council, the CIO Council. We know that we need to align our efforts, and we do think that the CDO Council can play a coordinating role to ensure that we're connected to those efforts and that we're aligning our resources, and that we're also modeling on the council the ways in which we need to be operating at our individual agencies because data is a team sport, and I think you'll hear that from the CDOs today, that this is an opportunity for us to bring some leadership in terms of coordination and alignment to get to the outcomes with regard to leveraging our data in a better way.
And I think the conversation we've had in the past is, where should the CDO report in an agency? And I don't know that there's one answer per se, but it would seem that some of the coordination you're talking about is either enhanced or maybe made a little more complicated at times based on the CDO's position in an agency. I'm curious if the documents that you published today address any, those aspects of how do you organize to get the most out of your data?
Sure. Well, we haven't provided any prescriptions. We have documented what the reporting relationships are, and I think there will be challenges and opportunities, in my personal opinion, and it is just my personal opinion, regardless of the specific reporting relationship. And I think we've seen successes with CDOs who report to CIOs or those who report to senior administration officials or others. But I think that is something that the community, and it is a new community, is going to develop and think about more in the future. So in my particular case, I report to the CIO, and I think that's been very, very powerful recipe for us to bring together our assistant CDOs in the mission areas, where they're focused on data and report to the business, but where we need to have an enterprise approach to analytics on a common platform. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, comment you made there, because there's a difference between the technology that supports data and who might own the data inside an agency and how they curate it, how they share it, how they develop it, and those roles and responsibilities. It's very easy to put them all in one place, but I think it sounds like as you're working through this, you're teasing out the differences between the technology that supports data and the data itself and its use, its care, its provenance. I think a lot of people will watch to see how that develops.
Yeah, and I would say, in general, one of the things that we've talked about is some CDOs are starting off as single individuals in organizations and looking to and making efforts and making progress, significant progress in defining what that role is and delivering value. And so, there's always a risk that roles end up in compliance kind of activities. On data inventory, for example, we want to go well beyond compliance. We know the value of inventorying our data, and we want to show those early wins. We want to develop analytic solutions or enable the organization to deliver value. And I think for us, that's been our focus more so than the specific reporting relationship. I think early on, that's something that we'll really try to focus on.
Well, very good, Ted. We have a minute or two left before we turn to the full conversation. We can talk about in more depth some of the USDA topics, but any concluding thoughts for our industry viewers today? Everyone's focused on an industry supporting government in the best way possible, and from a data perspective, the CDO Council perspective, these EOs you described. What should industry be thinking about as they have conversations with different decision makers in government?
Well, I would say, I think with the CDO Council and the CDO role and the Evidence Act in general, I think the bar has been raised and the expectations are going to continue to be raised around what's possible and how we need to think about our data. We need to support our statistical officials in getting better access to data, our partners. We have to do so with privacy protections in place. And so that really significantly raises the bar. But my I think overarching comment is I'm very encouraged by the fact that we do have these new roles in government, that we have a community around it who's starting to think about these issues. And I've seen a tremendous acceleration of the thinking and the collaboration and the sharing. And I would just communicate that I would expect that to continue and that we would need the support of industry to make sure that we have the solutions in place to help us to get there.
Well, thanks for that. I think, having transitioned from government into industry recently, I often find that my colleagues in industry were looking for comments like that from perspective from leaders like yourself to help us think about how we provide the best support. And I think that was great advice that you just provided, and I'm sure a lot of people really appreciated that. So thank you for sharing that, Ted. And at this time, I want to transition to the full panel. So if I can ask Jacques, Eileen, and Tom to turn your cameras on. We're going to broaden our conversation now. Hi, everybody. And I'm going to begin by asking you all to introduce yourselves and give a little perspective on your role. Where does your CEO function reside? And let's give us a little background so we know who we're talking to today. So I'll start with Jacques.
Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacques Villar. I am the Chief Data Officer at the FDIC. I report up to the CIO, and I can say that it works very well in our case. We have a great relationship, and I think our relationship is what makes this particular function under her in that organization work so well. I've been at the FDIC 12 years. This is my first government job. Prior to that, I was in banking with Washington Mutual Bank in Seattle. And ultimately that failed as part of the financial crisis in 2008, and that's how I ended up at the FDIC. So looking forward to participating this morning.
Thank you, Jacques. Eileen?
Good morning. My name is Eileen Vadrine. I am the Chief Data Officer at the Department of the Air Force, which is 2 military services, both air and space forces. Today, my organization aligns under the Undersecretary of the Air Force, but that's always a conversation. But today it's really for us making data actionable and as much as possible, and really using the power of our airmen and guardians. I like to say my leadership journey started as a soldier, as an enlisted soldier. I came back to government service after 9/11, Defense Intelligence Agency, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and then Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence before my tenure here at the Department of the Air Force. But it's really working not just in our department, but working with our colleagues across the military departments, because all of our missions we do together nowadays. So it's really that interoperability is the critical piece for us right now. Over.
Well, thanks, Eileen. You mentioned making data actionable. I want to get back to that later on, because that is a topic that I think comes up very often, moving from the dashboards to action. So I made a note to follow up. And Thomas, if you can give us a little background on yourself, please. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. So Tom Cicela, I am the Chief Data Officer for the Department of the Navy. Like Eileen, who is a new cohort of having services within their military departments. The Department of the Navy is the Secretariat, which is where I sit. I am currently in the CIO, although I did start this particular job in the CMO's office. And there's talk of maybe moving us around again. I don't know. There's a creating data advantage memo that was signed out by DefSecDef that is put an emphasis on reprioritizing data and making data the way the data is organized in the DoD, putting a little more emphasis on bringing it up to the senior leadership level. So, the partnership with the CIO has actually been fairly fortuitous, I think, as Jacques said, right? The advantage is I have a very small team. There's 4 of us, including myself. So having that kind of institution around the CIO and having that long-term support system baked into the Department of Defense has been really a benefit to get us off to the ground, right, and get us moving, and then it gives us a nice linkage into the system. So I think that's fortunate. Prior to coming to the Department of the Navy, like I said, I was Army. Eileen mentioned that earlier. I was the Chief Data Officer and about 27 other things whenever I worked for the Army, and then spent about 10, 12 years or so in the private sector working for the intelligence community. And interestingly enough, prior to that, I actually started my career at the Navy at the Naval Research Lab doing R&D and information security, kind of communication security for a variety of different things. So I feel like I've sort of come home in some regard by coming back to the Navy, but it's interesting looking kind of down from the Secretariat, some of the places I've been in the past. So it's definitely going to be fun. Over.
I think we have a nice diverse panel here, different perspectives from a reporting, from a reporting perspective and career background leading to this. I think one observation is that there's no single path career-wise to become a chief data officer. Just based on this panel, everyone has come through a different a different route. So that's one thing that I think is really important, that data is impactful everywhere to everyone. It's not just IT. You just look at your backgrounds. But I do want to pivot back to the federal data strategy. We heard Ted give some of his perspective, and I'm going to just ask Tom, and Eileen, and Jacques to tell the audience, how do you think it's going, and what are the things that your agencies are doing to achieve the goals? And then Ted, you'll take off your chair hat and put on your USDA hat, and I'd love to hear how USDA is doing too. So Tom, why don't you just pick up where you left off?
Sure, absolutely. So I do appreciate the federal data strategy, and more importantly, the action plan that has really helped us codify some what I'll call strategic direction from the big federal government out. DoD's been playing around in data for a long time, and like Eileen, I spent a lot of time in the intelligence community really focusing on data and trying to bring data to the forefront. So our new mantra, we about a year or so ago, we set up this kind of tagline of leveraging data for decision advantage at the speed of mission, right? And so we've pivoted a little bit to Eileen's point again earlier about we're going to try and operationalize data, but very specifically for operational advantage, right? Which is broader than just a purely decision advantage, right? So we want to, achieve that overmatch against our peer and near peer adversaries in this era of big power competition and whatnot. So the whole idea is to leverage those points in the action plan, leverage the federal data strategy, the DoD data strategy, which Eileen and I and some other folks helped craft prior to the arrival of Dave Spurk, who's our DoD CDO now. And make that real. And then, we have our implementation plan for the DoD data strategy, which draws from not only the Open Government Data Act, the Foundations Act, and the Federal Data Strategy, and the action plan and whatnot. So I think it's going fairly well. Ted mentioned earlier, which I think is vital, which is an inventory of our data assets. So I take this akin to, we spend a lot of time talking about our cyber terrain, right? Well, the adversaries aren't stealing our servers and our hardware, right? They're stealing the data on our servers, right? And so you might map out your cyber terrain. You might know what systems that you have. You might know what servers are out there, but you really need to know what data is on them should they become compromised or infected in some manner. If nothing else, the most recent SolarWinds attack kind of leads you down the road of, well, what did they really have access to, right? They might have, quote unquote, had access to the infrastructure, but again, they're exfiltrating information and data and intelligence, right? And so we're aggressively trying to pursue that right now. We've got a number of different initiatives to get after that. We are, however, because it's such a small team, trying to prioritize what we go after, and so we're doing that. So we've created this thing called a constellation process that we're following to start with key questions and outcomes, and so then we map outcomes to organizational needs, right? And then use those to prioritize. So those, what I'll call the high priority outcomes of the high priority key questions are the data that we're going after. So we establish our data needs. Then from there, we map that to the data that we have. And that's an interesting exercise, right? Because that leads us into what gaps do we have, but it also allows us to inventory the data we own. So I think it's going very well, and I think this all ties together very well.
Eileen, how does your experience in the Air Force compare to that in the Navy?
I actually think that I like to say Tom and I, we are trusted partners in things that we do. And I think that's really important. So I also would say that I think that we're making, great positive progress. The DepSec signed this creating data advantage memo, which really just reinforced the work that was articulated in the DoD data strategy. And then the Department of the Air Force also published an implementation plan to operationalize the DoD data strategy. And in that, we have 31 deliverable items. About a third of them are actually complete. About a third are working. And then, like Tom says about prioritization, there will be about a third that we continue to work for the rest of the fiscal year and into 22, but it's really about having measurable outcomes. So when I look at it, we published af.data.mil so that we could share openly what we can share openly. which I think is as important. It's just as important in our security component. But many things that the catalog piece is critical. We stood up a strategic integration forum, a true senior leader decision-making process to not just deliberately and intentionally corporately resource data moving forward from an enterprise perspective, making sure that we pull in all of those functional leaders so that they have a voice in that process, but also making sure that we're focusing on that interoperability. So under our strategic integration forum, we have multiple lines of effort, and one of them is really about the interoperability of data platforms, which aligns clearly with the Creating Data Advantage memo. So I think that we're making great positive momentum, and we're also doing very strong prioritization to make sure that we're tackling the important items at the top, making sure that they're at the top of the list.
Thank you, Eileen. So Jacques, we've heard the DoD side of the story. Pivoting in the civilian government, FDIC, what kind of focus have you placed on the federal data strategy, and what actions have you taken so far?
Well, it's been very, excuse me, it's been very critical to help us map out how we're going to move forward, and also delivering value very, very quickly. Like many agencies, we've thought about, having a CDO, right? But when the Open Data Act was signed, that pushed the agencies over the edge to say, okay, we're going to commit to this. Having the federal data strategy there as a guideline and the action plan, as Thomas mentioned, that helped us set our path. Prior to this role, I was on the business side of the FDIC, so delivering business value for my internal business customers, interdivisional, and working with the CIO organization as a partner to help deliver that. With the CDO role being in that CIO shop, you can very quickly get overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of tasks that you can think are important or want to attach to. So looking at the federal data strategy as a guide or an action plan, saying, okay, here's the target. How do I map my high priorities to this in the organization? What's going to bring me value back to the corporation? How can I explain that clearly and get that buy-in from my senior leadership and help them push down while I'm grabbing the grassroots guys and we're pushing up to deliver things of value back to the corporation as quickly as possible? You've heard already about the inventory of data assets, data cataloging. All of those things are great, but mapping those back to the business process and ensuring that change management within those lines of business in support of those tasks been critical, and it's been extremely valuable.
I'm really glad you mentioned change management, because without a focus on changing the way the organization thinks about data, uses data, governs the data, you're going to be facing a lot of dead end, right? So, Jacques, I applaud that change management perspective in this. And Ted, in your USDA role, can you talk a little bit of federal data strategy? And also, you didn't share some of your background in the beginning. So I know you didn't begin as a chief data officer. So how'd you get started at USDA and wind up here? Because I know it's very different than everyone else as well.
Sure. I started my early part of my career actually in the Navy. So I was a surface warfare officer before coming to the federal side. But I worked in one of our mission areas at USDA, which was rural development, which is the 10th or 11th largest lender in the country and the #1 lender in rural America. So worked intimately with that organization in terms of kind of overseeing their strategic priorities before coming to the CIO's office and serving in a number of roles, including, as you know, Jonathan, the chief of staff role, and really got involved with our strategy around data a few years ago. I will say we have benefited immensely from the leadership of Tom and Eileen and Jacques and others, and learning from them as we've implemented what we're always paying attention to what others are doing to try to leverage that. But we did begin part of our journey that I think was a significant project. Essentially, it started as a project around dashboards, so it was a single role. It was actually prior to the Evidence Act. And we really started with an internal focus on how to ensure that leaders had access to the information they needed to make decisions. And over the past 3 years, that resulted in a couple of things. One was higher expectations about what questions are possible to answer, an enterprise approach on a common platform, integrating data sources from our 19 agencies and offices, and establishing assistant CDOs in our mission areas who are focused on their individual business. For example, Dr. Jim Barham in our rural development mission area is focused on delivering rural development's data strategy and needs, and focused exclusively on that particular mission area. And I think that's been a pretty powerful recipe, so that when the Evidence Act was passed, we actually had quite a lot to govern. We saw an opportunity to stand up a governance board with real responsibilities, and there was much better understanding about what inventorying our data would mean. And it's now broadened into just a couple examples I'll highlight. One, in the midst of the pandemic, the need to get consistent information out to everyone was enabled by having a common platform where 10,000 leaders from the Secretary's office down to our field leaders could get consistent information. And our partnership with HHS and the CDO Council was a powerful recipe for demonstrating what's possible, but also the drivers behind why we're doing what we're doing. And that goes into our data skills development work, the additional work that we're doing on our future state, where we're looking at how statistical agencies and our broader external partners are essential to our use of their data. For example, the data we use from census that helps us to understand the impact of our programs when we serve communities and have equitable administration of our programs. So it's just been a huge amount of change in a short amount of time, but as you mentioned, change management has been really critical for us.
So I just want to build on something that you said, and we have some audience questions that I want to get to as well. But Ted, you talked about getting started with dashboards so people can make decisions. How does that evolve? And I'm curious of all of your perspectives here to where maybe we can make decisions based on what the data looks like without having to route it through somebody. Can you workflow some of these things based on what you already know about a process, so you can take action very quickly and in an automated way? How possible is that? Are you heading in that direction? Ted, is that your dashboards 2.0?
I think it is an evolution more than a revolution, and I think from the beginning it was starting with moving people from suspicion and skepticism to hope and optimism. That's kind of my mantra. Is people don't realize the insights they can get. We need to start with the business questions. We need to make sure we understand the priorities, and we need to do everything we can to bring them the insights that they need. Prototyping is very powerful for that, iterative development, and a willingness to take a look at the data in a new way. So we do ask folks to suspend their disbeliefs in our exercises and engagements with them. But what that's led into, I think we're a little bit beyond that now. I think people are excited about what's possible, and the expectations that leaders have begun to ramp up. In fact, although we tell them to start with questions, they now have a much better understanding of what's possible with things like natural language processing. Although we never lead with the technology or the solution, they sort of have a better understanding now intuitively about what they can ask for, and that's helped to ramp up the expectations in those assistant chief data officer roles, in their demand to hire and to find and retain and recruit and train the best talent. So I do think it's a revolution, or it's an evolution, but we're kind of on that journey.
Eileen, you mentioned this idea of making your data actionable when you gave your opening remarks. How are you doing it at the Air Force?
Well, one of the things that we did very early on was we built a self-service platform. We call it Vault: Visible, Accessible, Understandable, Linked, and Trustworthy. The first 5 strategic goals of the DoD data strategy, the last 2 are interoperable and secure. And it's really about any airman or guardian can get access to this platform. We started with open source tools because I don't have to count licenses. But we also today we have a capability to bring your own tool. So we work with our functional customers out there to bring the tool, because I think it's really about the speed of relevancy. How do I get today's data and emerging or current state tools into the airmen or guardians' hands now, because they're ultra smart. They are our superpower. They have so much capability. Many of our young airmen and guardians have grown up digital data natives. They understand this, and to be able to give them the tools to empower them to drive data insight, I think is game changing for us. And so we started really small, but it also, as we moved into COVID and remote work, that capability existed. So today we have thousands of airmen and guardians log on daily to do this type of work. And I think that is really a grassroots effort, leveraging the skills that they brought into our department.
Eileen, I really love that, because you mentioned these digital natives, right? People who are joining the workforce today, and they've grown up in this environment where they have access all the time to what they want. You're giving them a work environment that is closer to their personal life environment. And, I think that's a real, it's a very interesting approach to getting people to, be engaged in the organization, want to stay. You're giving them modern tools. I applaud that. That's very smart thinking.
Awesome.
Yeah. Tom and Jacques, any additional thoughts or comments on this idea of being able to make data actionable, whether it's very accessible or using workflow or other automation technologies to do things with data without having to take action steps?
Sure. Just very quickly, and I'll pass it to Tom. If we are ever going to advance enough to take advantage of what cloud can provide via scale, you have to automate, right? And you have to have that data available and its relevancy, right? But you have to also have a clear understanding of what that is. You could have those various zones of data, of raw data where your data scientist just attached to it, right? But you might have a very well curated zone of data that your Joe or Jane analyst might need access to do their particular sets of work. And in showing, what Ted mentioned about starting small and showing that value, allowing them to use their tools on their normal analysis, but bringing in the art of the possible with some of the advantages that the platform might bring, for example, with letting them automate their own data trails, or creating visualizations and drawing in rich data from your lake to allow them to do that work. It's a very exciting space, and it's something we're excited about pursuing at the office. Tom?
Hey, thanks. Yeah, so I just want to echo what everyone's already said, but our recent discovery, and I don't want to say that it wasn't like a V8 moment or whatever, but it's the pivot from the system-centric model to a data-centric model or an outcome-centric model, right? Because data has been wrapped up with the CIO for such a long time, it has become an IT thing for IT people, in this sense that the system owners are also the data owners is I'll call it a pervasive cultural idiom, at least in the DoD, that we're trying to plod through. And in fact, we've been having a lot of conversations, because it is really the data producers are the ones that control the quality, not the people who run the systems, the
right.
applications, right? And so part of that, getting the data into the hands of the users is to say, hey, this is what we have. And we've had some discovery moments, not necessarily, it's more like fumbling around in the dark, to be quite honest, with the data, right? And we actually, this is a couple weeks or so ago, and I suppose the good news is I have another meeting tomorrow to do the same, but we showed the Secretary of the Navy some of the data that we actually had. And there was a lot of curious moments. He was like, yes, that's the data, right? But so we've coined a term, right? Discovery, then recovery. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. So we have discovered where we are, and so now we can plot a path forward. And I think that's the most exciting part of all of this, right? And then kind of breaking down, I call it data miners, the people who want to mine the data, hold on to it, it's mine, you can't have it. But we want to turn it into this discovery model. And by starting with those key questions, it's really actually allowed us to tie it back to mission needs. And I found with the system owners, they're a lot more open to quote unquote giving us their data, not that it's theirs per se, right? But I can say, hey, this data is going to answer this question for this purpose and influence this outcome. And they're like, oh, okay, right? As opposed to giving all the data in your system, and they're like, what do you want that for, right? I got 27 cybersecurity rules that you're going to violate by doing that. So I do encourage folks to kind of approach it from that track. And then bring them in on day one as well. I bring everyone together, the functionals, the system owners, the key question holders. So it's interesting to put the people who are asking the questions in the room with the people who have the data. And they become a lot more, the system owners become a lot more flexible.
I love your recognition of the transition from a system-centric model to a data-centric model and the cultural implications of that. And back to where we were talking about where the CDO sits, and it could vary and maybe you'll evolve over time. We do have a question from the audience that I want to reference because I think it's really important. The question, summary is, what are you doing to address data that's locked in legacy applications that don't support APIs or other means of exposing the data? I'm just going to guess that some of you have systems that are very old and maybe less accessible than others. So, but with great data, leveraging that data via workflow, via your accessibility tools or whatever is critical to being able to transform digitally. So how do you do it? Eileen, I saw you kind of raise your hand a second ago. So I'm gonna let you start maybe and share any additional thoughts you have.
I think that it begins with the concept of really prioritizing. There's tons of data out there. You can't do it all at one time. So you have to really look at what are your priorities. I run a small data lab it's based out of Andrews Air Force Base, but we do it virtually. And we have problem sets, enterprise focused problem sets that come in from all over the department. And we team functional leads, question holders with, I would say, the data experts, so that together we work as a collaborative team. And yes, we have items in what I would say less up-to-date systems, and we need to prioritize. But what we're also finding is that there are data gaps. So I would say that 20% of our data is on some amazing airman or guardian's desktop because they started collecting something because they recognized a gap, and they realize, they see it from an operational perspective, but that goodness can be done, that data for good is necessary and needed at a strategic level too. So I think that making data actionable and actually showing value helps identify and prioritize, because if we look at some of our first data use cases, some of them used similar or common data sets. So those were the ones that we focused on first, both in terms of visibility, accessibility, and quality. And because we can get the best return on investment from really maturing those particular sets out first. And so I would just, yes, we want to embrace the legacy transition, moving to open source, making everything visible in that catalog so you know what it is, where it is, and how to get access to it. But it's also about making sure that we prioritize what and really being good stewards of the U.S. taxpayer dollars in terms of investment in the maturity of that data. So I think it's not one thing, it's a combination of all of them. And it begins with having the conversation.
Yeah, always a good place to start. Now, the number of systems that we have in the government that are, quote unquote legacy systems is pretty high, and probably, building on what Eileen said, there's a lot of data that is either in them or somewhere else on a desktop or some other Access database even, right? Lotus Notes database, things that we know still exist. How are the others of you, Ted, Jacques, Tom, how are you going after these other data sets that might be helpful in answering some?
Yeah, so again, similar to what Eileen said, right, we're trying to prioritize, but so a few years or so ago, the director of the JAIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, coined this term "no new bad," right? And so interestingly enough, in our Dawn IT East conference last week, Lewis Shepard, who's an old coworker of mine, coined a new phrase that I think is the half-full version of that, which is "live the new good," right? And that resonates with me, because what we've done, and like Eileen and some other folks, right, we've built a platform that allows us to get after the challenges that we've experienced this, over the years. So what we've done is we snapped that line, right? So for new systems, we're going to live the new good, right? We're going to approach it in an open API manner. We're going to approach it with open standards. We're going to take that data. We're going to free that data. We're going to stick it in a place that people can see it, know what it is, exploit it, use it for operational advantage, right? For the legacy systems, yeah, the data is quote unquote locked in these legacy systems, but look, at the end of the day, they're just IT systems. There is an API of one form or another. It might not be a nice modern web API or something, right? But it's likely some sort of n-tiered application with a database of some sort or another, usually a traditional relational database. There are tools out there to gain access to that data. And we have them and we're leveraging them. What I would tell you is the challenge, which has become 80% of our work, is making sense of what's in them. And not just, is the data that the user put in sensible, right? But the format of the way the application is stored the data, is it sensible, right? There are a handful of applications we run into that are storing their data in proprietary formats. And so they may be using a database, but then they go ahead and they kind of put a little extra magic on it that makes it a little less useful. But in general, most of the applications that we are interested in, we found, pretty much open in that regard. And so what we're doing is we're tying these data needs back to the questions, right? And what we're finding is a very, very small number of systems are capable of answering a very large number of questions, which is really allowing us to start asking ourselves, why do we have thousands of IT systems when we only need tens to answer the questions that people are asking, right? And it's a rampant duplication of, it's not my system, I need my system, so I want to put that data in my system, right? And it's a little bit of the have and have-nots, I would say, to a certain extent. When you have
there's a very human element to that.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not the DoD, it's not civilian, it's not private sector either. I think people love their data and they love their systems. So yeah, the change management that Jacques alluded to, I think is very important in changing the culture. I want to build on this topic by moving to the idea of unstructured data. So much valuable information in the unstructured data. So Jacques and Ted, if you could share how you're incorporating unstructured data to the extent that you are into these conversations. It's not that dissimilar from data locked on a desktop somewhere.
Sure, I'll start and then I'll kick it to you, Ted. So yeah, unstructured data is extremely important, especially if you're looking at the mission of the FDIC and the work that we're doing examining banks, but not just open banks and looking at the health of banking in the United States, but also failed banks. What kind of insights can you get from a failed institution for looking at what data you have on that institution? There are several different initiatives at the FDIC that we work on that are using some ML type capabilities to model and stress test what the banking health is at any given time. We feed that into the regular reporting we do on a quarterly basis. We have other systems that are a little bit more advanced that are scanning documentation, semi-structuring it, and gleaning analysis so we can gain insights and assist with the bank examination process and ensuring we see what we think we see. On the failed bank side of life, I mean, as you can imagine, there's a rich resource of email corpus, board meeting minutes, any number of documents that we may have from a failed institution that can be researched and looked at. So we have a group of folks in our Center for Financial Research that are doing studies related to that. It's critical and it's only going to get bigger. Big things we care about around that are safety and soundness, right? Security has to come first, especially when you're working with data that's that sensitive. As we get smarter and as we're moving into more of a self-service analytics type of environment, how do we enable these functions for these citizen data scientists to do their work and get into this unstructured data without having to, line up a whole staff of IT folks to help them cleanse or data engineer the data, to let them do their work on their own. No, it's very critical. It's going to get nothing but larger as we're moving forward, and it's something that we're working on today, and it's really exciting.
Yep. Thank you, Jock. Ted, unstructured data, and how is it changing, or how are you using it to maybe drive some of the key priorities at USDA? Well,
I've just been reflecting here quietly for a minute about the benefit of hanging out with smart people like and Jock, because I've been taking notes on living the new good, and I think Tom's comments about getting the data owners into the room with the business owners, and Eileen's comment about prioritization. All of those things I think speak to all aspects of what we do, and I think that goes to how we deal with unstructured data as well. So we've certainly been looking at what are the priority opportunities and how does it relate to the questions that people have. So we want to make sure we have a platform and a team and a staff that knows how to work with it. But different use cases like understanding the impact of our research and collaborations with the Patent and Trademark Office to help us use natural language processing to link the research we fund at USDA and better understanding how that leads to patents. I mean, that's just one opportunity. On the CDO Council, one of our priority projects this year was supporting public comment analysis. We know that activity happens across government, can be very manual intensive, and there isn't really a standard process for some of the use cases there. So we've been working over the past few months to work across agencies on using the latest in NLP, and that is a rapidly developing field. It's honestly hard to keep up with some of the models as they're being developed, and I think we have just a great opportunity to look at those common solutions. So we've been working on common use cases, and we'll have a report out on that in the next month or so. There's also a Kaggle competition that's out there right now, where several agencies, including USDA's Economic Research Service, are trying to better understand through NLP how government data is being used in research. And I think that's just another example of how we can understand the value of our data. So,
and what was that competition? Kaggle, maybe I misheard you. What is that?
Public data competition with prize money that awards people for developing the best models to achieve a particular goal or objective. In this case, it's creating understanding around how government data is used in research publications. So.
Very good. Well, we have, I think, time for one more topic before I ask you all for some final thoughts. The last topic, I think, is the most critical to your long-term success. You need people, you need talent in your organizations that understand data, understand its use, have a vision for how it can be used further in the future, making it actionable, all these things we've talked about. How are you acquiring the talent? Are you hiring people? Are you reskilling people? Are you pulling people from different disciplines, like you all came from different disciplines? What's the plan in each of your organizations to make sure you have the right people for the future? Well, I'm just going to start with Tom, and we'll go around the horn.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I mentioned in our implementation strategy for the DoD data strategy implementation plan is a line of effort 2, which is the evolution of the workforce, and Eileen has a similar line of effort as well. But it's the general upskilling of our workforce, and so that's multifaceted. We have a hiring. I want to call it's not quite a working group, but a group of folks are looking into hiring. And this is one area where, like, Dan Morgan is doing some great work with Ted on hiring kind of data professionals across the federal government. And so how do we get tied into that work is something that we're working with inside the DoD. we've got a lot of hoops we got to jump through. I think it's easier for others than maybe for us, and that's more from a civilian perspective. And then as we onboard and go through the accessions process for our military personnel, right? How do we make sure they're getting those most fundamental skills when they come on board? And because if you think about it, the relatively newer military folks are the predominant producers of data, of manually entered data anyway, or at least personnel data, right? If it's not coming from some sort of sensor platform, right? And so getting them to understand the value of data, and then at different grade levels and at different echelons within the Department of Navy, how do we train folks and get them understanding and aware? And so Eileen's done some really great work in that area as well, and we're leveraging some work that has been done at a big DoD on the education side. That one of our colleagues has done. They actually have an entire digital learning platform that they've built predominantly for their functional area, but we can looking into how we can adopt that and integrate that our data environments. So maybe I'll hand the baton over to Eileen, and she can talk about the great work that we're partnering with her on for the DoD. Over.
Thanks, Tom. I would like to say that it's all of the above. You have to, so you have to bring in talent. How are we doing that in the Air Force? On the military side today, airmen can and guardians can actually, our cadets at the Air Force Academy can study data science or minor in data science. They will go into all mission areas in our military department. That's going to be game changing for us. But we're also, year one that I had the seat, this role, we branched out with a data science intern program. We just brought in our next cohort. I like to say that our first data science intern, I gave him one of his homework assignments was, what are all your other peers doing this summer while you're here at the Department of the Air Force? And he came back and he went from entry-level use case development to AI algorithm development in a 12-week summer intern program. We gave him great visibility. Today, he is a full-time Department of the Air Force civilian, and in his first year of employment, he was the headquarters Category 1 Civilian of the Year. These people are, that's pretty awesome, but he was so excited to come back and say, I had the best internship because we have some of the best opportunities in the federal government to really help them grow and mature, give them the hardest opportunities to study. And so he came up today, he went back and he found, when he came back after he graduated, that the project he started was in operation, in production while he went to school. So he could see the difference, but it's also about what Tom is talking about, upskilling what we have. We have data officers in all of our major commands and functional areas. So one of the things that we did was we created we partnered with a small company to build a data governance boot camp that they sit for the ICCP federal sector data governance professional certification. We did that year one. We're actually next week running our next iteration of it. That gives everybody a baseline that's in the data governance perspective, because we found that they all had different backgrounds. So we wanted to have a baseline to build from, but it's also great online content in Digital U. It's short courses, graduate certificate program at AFIT, Air Force Institute of Technology. Our pilot had 200. Today we have 2,000 people studying for a data science online graduate certificate. So it's really about not one thing, it's about everything.
Well, thank you, Jacques, how do we get FDIC data talent? 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds or less. I've been very lucky. We have great programs at the FDIC to bring in raw talent. Economic analysts, which are basically entry-level positions coming in to assist us. We've been able to drive talent, skill them up, put them on teams, give them real deliverables so they could do that. We hire interns. I hired my intern. She's awesome. Can't wait to watch her grow. And the fact is we're competing with everybody because we all have some great jobs out there.
Right. So in Ted, you started us off, you're going to get to have the last word on our panel today. So, beyond acquiring talent, any additional thoughts, comments, lessons learned that that you want to share? There's been so many great ideas here. What are you taking forward?
Well, what a great conversation. It's just fantastic to work with these leaders. I will end in talking about the staffing questions and just say I think that the federal government, although we have some challenges and we have a big road ahead of us, we do have a competitive advantage in the kinds of missions that we have. And I think as you listen to Tom and Eileen speak about their mission, and Jacques, and I think about USDA and managing forests and wildfire, feeding hungry people, ensuring the safety of our food. It's just an incredible opportunity that people have, and given the Evidence Act, the federal data strategy, the CDO Council, and the emphasis on data, I'm really optimistic about USDA's ability to recruit the talent that we need. Tom mentioned the federal-wide hiring action, which has gotten a ton of attention. There's like 60 opportunities from agencies and counting that we're going to be hiring off of from that. So again, just looking forward to the progress and continued conversations like this. Appreciate it.
Ted, I think you really hit on the major selling point for people that join the government, the challenge, but really the value and complexity of these missions that support the country. And an agency like USDA touches the lives of all Americans. You know, we saw it together as we worked there, but it is a way to have a real impact in our country, in your community sometimes, but the world at large. And data is the key. And data is, you all are positioning data to create a more transparent government, to create a government that is more accessible, more equitable, more accountable. So I applaud all of you for doing that. And it is the starting point for our nation's digital transformation. It's happening in bits and pieces as we really understand our data, how it moves through our organizations, how that work flows through our organizations. We can create processes and systems and opportunities for people to be better served. And you're all doing that. And I'm proud of all of you for the work you've done. And just really grateful for you joining me today for this conversation. I look forward to the rest of the conference. I see Mike has joined us again.
Yeah, Jonathan, excellent job. You're a natural. And Ted, Jacques, Eileen, and Thomas, on behalf of the Digital Government Institute team and our audience out there, I can't thank you enough. You know, I thought an hour would be enough. I think we could have gone and taken the whole morning. There's so much wonderful work all of you are doing. And I thank you all for your service, current and prior, Jonathan, even though you're servicing the government. But thank you, ServiceNow. Thank you for great kickoff.